This isn't a shelter. You don't belong here. We don't feed people who can't pay.
Please, we just wanted...
I said out. Now.
This isn't a shelter. You don't belong here. The manager's voice cut through the diner without hesitation or shame. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed, as if daring anyone to challenge him. We don't feed people who can't pay. Take your problems somewhere else. He didn't wait for a response. His hand lifted sharply and pointed at the door. A few customers laughed. One shook his head with a smirk. Others looked away, suddenly very interested in their plates. The old couple stood there, frozen. The woman tightened her grip on her worn handbag, fingers trembling. The man tried to speak, his lips parting as if to explain, to ask, to plead, but the manager cut him off instantly. I said out. Now. His voice was louder this time, final and satisfied. The man nodded once, slowly, the way someone does when they understand there is no dignity left to protect. He placed a steady hand on the woman's back and guided her toward the door. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply lowered her eyes and followed. The bell above the door rang as they stepped outside, letting the cold rush in behind them. Ilara saw everything. She stood behind the counter, a plate forgotten in her hands, her chest tightening in a way she couldn't ignore. This wasn't policy. This wasn't impatience. This was cruelty delivered comfortably, spoken by someone who knew he wouldn't be questioned. The woman's face stayed with Ilara, not angry, not ashamed, but hollow. That look struck something deep inside her. She knew it too well. She had worn it herself. It was Christmas Eve, and the diner was packed. Warm air buzzed with conversation and careless laughter. Plates arrived heavy with food. People complained freely, secure in their right to be there. Ilara moved quietly among them, invisible by habit. Her name was Ilara, though few bothered to use it. She was Waitress, or hey, or nothing at all. That had always been easier than being judged. In her apron pocket was $50, folded neatly and counted twice. It wasn't spare money or tip set aside for comfort. It was medicine money. By morning, her father would need it. Without it, the coughing would return, the kind that left him gasping and left her awake through the night, listening, afraid of what silence might mean. She felt the weight of the bills press against her side as she stared at the door the couple had just been forced through. She told herself to stay where she was. To keep working. To survive. But something inside her refused. She set the plate down and stepped away from the counter. No one noticed. Outside, the cold bit through her clothes instantly. The couple stood nearby, unsure where to go next, shoulders hunched against the night. Excuse me, Ilara said quietly. They turned, startled. You can come back in. They hesitated, years of disappointment written in their eyes. I'll take care of it, she added. That was all. She led them back inside and seated them at a small table in the corner, away from stares and judgment. She brought soup first, steam rising as their hands wrapped around the bowls. Then bread. Then tea. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. Kindness rarely asks permission. As they ate, Ilara returned to work, her movements automatic. Every step reminded her of the cost she was choosing. When the plates were cleared, the man reached into his coat, then stopped. He looked up, embarrassed. Ilara shook her head gently. It's okay. She reached into her apron, touched the folded bills, thought of the empty pill bottle waiting at home, and placed the money on the counter. $50. No one noticed. No one applauded. That night, Ilara walked home hungry, fear pressing against her ribs with every step. She didn't feel brave or proud. She felt exposed. And she had no idea that the people who had just been humiliated and thrown out would return in less than 48 hours, dressed differently, speaking differently, asking for her by name, and that when they did, the room would finally understand what she had seen. Ilara did not sleep that night. The diner lights followed her home, flickering in her mind long after the streets went dark. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because she regretted what she had done, but because she knew exactly what it would cost. The cold pressed through her shoes, up her legs, into her bones, and by the time she reached the small apartment she shared with her father, fear had settled into her chest like something permanent. Inside, the room smelled faintly of medicine and old wood. Her father lay asleep on the narrow bed, his breathing uneven, shallow, the way it had become in recent months. Elara stood in the doorway and watched him for a long moment, counting each rise and fall of his chest. She told herself he would be fine. She told herself she would figure something out. She told herself many things that night, because the truth was too heavy to hold all at once. On the table beside the bed sat the empty pill bottle. She picked it up, turned it slowly in her hand, then set it back down without a word. There was nothing to be done until morning. No money. No backup plan. Just waiting. At dawn, her father woke coughing. The sound cut through the room like glass. Elara rushed to his side, lifting him gently, rubbing his back the way she had learned to do. He smiled at her between breaths, apologetic even in pain. "I'm all right," he whispered, though both of them knew he wasn't. She made tea. She opened the window slightly. She did everything except look at the clock. When she left for work, she carried the weight of the night with her. The streets were quieter now, decorated with remnants of celebration that felt almost mocking. Wrapping paper lay abandoned in gutters. Strings of lights blinked weakly from balconies. Christmas had passed for everyone else. For Elara, the consequences had just begun. At the diner, nothing had changed. The same manager barked orders. The same customers complained. The same plates clattered, the same laughter rose and fell without meaning. No one mentioned the old couple. No one asked where Elara had gone the night before. If kindness had happened, it had happened in silence, and silence, she was learning, did not echo. She worked through the day with a quiet ache behind her eyes. Every tip she received felt like a reminder of how short she still was. Every smile she forced felt borrowed. She avoided the door, half expecting to see the couple again, half afraid she wouldn't. They did not return. When her shift ended, she walked home slowly, counting possibilities that led nowhere. Borrowing money wasn't an option. Pride wasn't the issue, there was simply no one left to ask. By the time she reached the apartment, her resolve was thin, worn down by exhaustion and worry. Her father was asleep again, but the coughing had returned. Softer now, but persistent. Elara sat beside him and held his hand, staring at the wall, feeling very small. This was the part no one saw. Not the decision, not the kindness, but the aftermath. The quiet cost paid alone. The next morning, she returned to work early, her body moving on habit alone. That was when she saw it. A basket sat on the counter where the cash register usually rested. Neatly arranged. Out of place. For a moment, she thought it belonged to someone else. But no one claimed it. No one even seemed to notice it. Inside were fresh fruits. Bread. And tucked carefully beneath them, a small paper bag from a pharmacy. Elara's heart stuttered. She reached inside with shaking hands and pulled out a familiar box of medication. Her father's name was written clearly on the label. Correct dosage. Correct refill. At the bottom of the basket lay a small note. No signature. No explanation. Just 4 words, written neatly. Thank you for seeing us. Elara stood there for a long time, the noise of the diner fading into the background. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed, deeply, as something tight inside her finally loosened. She still didn't know who they were. She still didn't know why this had happened. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, she understood something important. Her kindness had not disappeared into nothing. It had only gone quiet. And somewhere, unseen, it was still moving. Elara did not tell anyone about the basket. Not the manager. Not her coworkers. Not even her father. Some moments felt too fragile to be explained, as if speaking them aloud might break whatever quiet order they had created. She carried the basket home carefully that evening, as though it were something borrowed rather than given. Her father noticed the medication immediately. He looked at her with tired curiosity, but she only smiled and said someone at work had helped. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. That night, as her father slept more peacefully than he had in weeks, Elara sat by the window and let the silence settle. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't bracing herself for the next crisis. She wasn't calculating how many days she could stretch what little she had. The basket hadn't solved her life, but it had done something just as important. It had interrupted her fear. She began to think differently after that. Not about money. Not about miracles. About herself. For years, Elara had lived like someone passing through her own life, careful not to take up space, careful not to expect too much. She had learned early that hope was dangerous if you couldn't afford disappointment. So she kept her head down. Worked hard. Endured quietly. Kindness, she believed, was something you gave when you were strong enough to survive without it returning. But that night, she realized something had shifted. She had given when she was weakest. And it had still mattered. At the diner, she moved the same way she always had, but something inside her posture had changed. She no longer shrank when the manager barked orders. She no longer rushed apologies she didn't owe. She spoke calmly. Clearly. She didn't argue or challenge him, but she didn't disappear either. It was subtle. Almost invisible. But people felt it. Customers looked at her longer when she spoke. Co-workers asked her questions they hadn't before. And Elara noticed herself making decisions with less fear. She didn't fight back. She didn't explain herself. She didn't tell her story. She simply chose differently, again and again, in small ways no one would ever applaud. She took her father on short walks when the weather allowed. She read to him in the evenings. She filled the apartment with small routines that made life feel less like survival and more like living. None of it looked like progress from the outside. There were no promotions. No sudden opportunities. No dramatic change in circumstance. But inside her, something was growing steadier. She stopped measuring her worth by what she lacked. She stopped believing invisibility was the same as safety. And most importantly, she stopped assuming that goodness was always wasted. Days passed. Then another. Christmas decorations disappeared from storefronts. The city returned to its normal pace. The diner settled back into routine, the incident of Christmas Eve already fading into forgettable noise for everyone except Elara. She thought of the couple sometimes, wondered where they had gone, whether they were warm, whether they were well. She didn't expect to see them again. Whatever they had needed from her had already been given. That was enough. Or so she thought. On the third morning after Christmas, she arrived at work early, as usual. The diner was quieter then, sunlight slipping through the windows in long, pale streaks. She tied her apron, poured coffee, and prepared herself for another ordinary day. The bell above the door rang. Elara looked up instinctively. Two figures stood just inside the entrance. Something about them felt familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. They weren't hunched this time. They didn't hesitate. Their coats were darker, heavier, tailored. Their posture was calm, unhurried, confident in a way that drew attention without asking for it. They didn't look around the diner. They looked straight ahead. And then the woman spoke. "Excuse me," she said gently. "We're looking for someone." The manager straightened immediately, his tone shifting before Elara could even react. "Of course," he said. "Who might that be?" The woman smiled, her eyes already searching the room. "She's a waitress," she said. "Her name is Elara." The air seemed to change. Elara felt her heartbeat slow, not quicken. Whatever this moment was, it didn't feel threatening. It felt deliberate. She stepped forward without being called, her movements calm, her voice steady. "I'm Elara," she said. The couple turned toward her fully now. Recognition passed between them, quiet and unmistakable. The woman's smile deepened. The man nodded once, the same nod he had given days earlier, but this time it carried something else. Not resignation. Purpose. And in that moment, Elara understood something before a single explanation was offered. Whatever was about to happen had nothing to do with money. And everything to do with who she had chosen to be when no one was watching. The room hadn't gone silent yet. But it was about to. The room did not fall silent all at once. It happened in pieces. A chair scraped the floor and wasn't pushed back in. A spoon hovered above a cup of coffee and never made it back down. Conversation thinned, then broke, then disappeared entirely. People sensed it before they understood it, the shift that comes when something important is unfolding and no one wants to miss it. The couple did not raise their voices. They did not announce themselves. They didn't need to. The manager straightened fully now, his earlier arrogance replaced by something tighter, more cautious. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the best table near the window, the one usually reserved for people he wanted to impress. "Sit wherever you like." The man glanced at the table, then shook his head gently. "No," he said. "We'll sit here." He chose the small corner table. The same one Elara had led them to days earlier. That alone unsettled the room. Elara stood across from them, unsure whether to speak or wait. The woman studied her closely, not with curiosity, but with recognition. "You look different today," she said softly. Elara nodded. "So do you." The woman smiled, pleased, as if that answer mattered. The man reached into his coat, slow enough for everyone to notice. A few people leaned forward instinctively, expecting money. An envelope. Something dramatic. What he placed on the table was a thin folder. He didn't slide it toward Elara immediately. Instead, he rested his hand on it and looked around the diner. His eyes moved calmly from face to face, lingering just long enough to be felt. "This place," he said, evenly, "is very good at deciding who belongs." The manager swallowed. "We were here a few nights ago," the woman continued. "We were cold. Hungry. And told, quite clearly, that we didn't belong." Her tone wasn't accusing. It was factual. That made it worse. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. "We left," the man said. "Because that was easier than arguing." He turned his attention back to Elara. "But you didn't." Elara felt every eye shift toward her. "You didn't know who we were," the woman said. "You didn't know what we could do for you. You didn't even know if we'd thank you." She paused. "And you still chose to see us." The man finally slid the folder across the table. Inside were documents. Clean. Precise. Names that carried weight. Companies people recognized even if they didn't understand them. Foundations. Medical coverage. Opportunities laid out carefully, intentionally, as if this moment had been planned long before Elara ever reached into her apron pocket. A murmur spread through the diner, low and disbelieving. The manager's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "This isn't charity," the man said, calmly, as if reading his thoughts. "And it isn't a reward." He looked directly at Elara. "It's alignment." Elara didn't reach for the folder. She didn't gasp or cry or step back. She simply stood there, steady, as though she had been expecting something, not this exactly, but something like it. "I didn't help you for this," she said quietly. "We know," the woman replied. "That's why we're here." Silence filled the diner completely now. Not the careless silence from before, but a heavy one. A listening silence. The man stood. "We own several properties in this city," he said. "We fund scholarships, clinics, programs most people never hear about. We've spent years testing one question." He looked around again. "Who is kind when kindness costs them something?" His gaze returned to Elara. "You answered it without knowing it was being asked." He extended his hand. Elara took it, not trembling, not eager, just present. The manager finally found his voice. I didn't know," he stammered. "No," the woman said gently. "You didn't want to." That was the end of the conversation. They left soon after, not with applause, not with ceremony. Elara stood in the same spot long after the door closed behind them. She hadn't smiled. She hadn't spoken more than necessary. She didn't need to. The moment had spoken for her. And everyone in the room knew it. Elara didn't know yet that the folder wouldn't matter until it was almost too late. She left the diner the same way she always did, quietly, coat pulled tight against the cold, the city indifferent to whatever had just happened inside those walls. The moment stayed behind her, contained. Finished. Or so it seemed. She was halfway down the hallway of her apartment building when someone called her name. Not gently. Urgently. "Elara." Mrs. Nolan from next door was standing outside her door, her face pale, her hands trembling as if they'd been wringing the air. Before Alara could ask anything, the words came out in a rush. "Your father," he collapsed. The world narrowed. Mrs. Nolan spoke quickly as they moved. Said he'd gone out for his usual slow evening stroll, the one he took when his breathing felt manageable. Said he'd stopped suddenly, pressed his hand to his chest, and sat down hard on the pavement. His heartbeat, she said, had gone strange, too fast, then uneven. At his age, she added breathlessly, the doctor once warned us. Atrial fibrillation. It can strike without warning. By the time they reached the hospital, Alara's thoughts were splintered into fragments. The smell of antiseptic. The brightness of the lights. Her father's name spoken by strangers. A nurse leading her to a counter instead of a bedside. Then came the sentence that stopped everything. "We'll need an upfront payment before we proceed with advanced care." The amount was said calmly. Professionally. It was more money than Alara had ever seen at once. More than she could borrow. More than the $50 she had given away days ago, the same $50 meant for her father's supplements, the ones she had skipped so strangers could eat. For a moment, the weight of that choice pressed down on her chest. Not regret. Reality. Her father lay beyond those doors, his heart slipping out of rhythm, his age working against him with quiet cruelty. The doctor explained the risks, the urgency, the difference proper treatment could make if they acted now. Alara nodded, her throat tight. Then her fingers brushed the strap of her bag. The folder. She hadn't opened it. Had barely thought about it since the diner. Now, with hands that no longer felt like her own, she pulled it out and placed it on the counter. She didn't explain. She didn't speak. The nurse opened it. Her eyes moved quickly at first. Then slower. Then she stood up. "I'll take this," she said, her tone changing. "Please wait here." Everything after that moved with terrifying precision. Specialists were called. Equipment appeared. Her father was transferred without delay. The care he received was not ordinary. It was thorough. Immediate. The kind reserved for people whose treatment was not limited by numbers on a form. Hours later, a doctor sat with Alara and spoke plainly. The arrhythmia was severe, he said. But it was caught in time. With this level of care, he has the best possible chance. When Alara finally sat beside her father's bed, dawn was beginning to thin the darkness outside the window. His breathing was steady again. His hand warm in hers. Alive. Only then did the truth settle fully into place. The money she had given away had not vanished. It had simply moved ahead of her. The kindness she thought had cost her everything had returned at the only moment that truly mattered, not as luck, not as coincidence, but as consequence. She hadn't saved her father with wealth. She had saved him with a choice she made on a cold night, when no one was watching, when kindness had no guarantee. And in that quiet hospital room, Alara understood something she would never forget. Sometimes, the act you think costs you the most is the very act that saves you in the end. If stories like this remind you that kindness still matters, that quiet choices still shape lives, then this space was made for you. Subscribe to stay with stories that honor moments like these.